I bring one of them dead, thrown around like rag dolls, and the house falling to pieces around them. And he's glad to see the end of the film. I can tell you that. I jabbed my finger with the needle as my eavesdropper's ears picked the conversation out of the common room's general din. A few tables over, two men were drinking beer. One was tall and bald, the other was fat with a red beard. "You're such an old woman," the fat one. "You'll listen to any piece of gossip." The tall man shook his head somberly. "I was in the cabin when they came in with the news. They were gathering folk with wagons so they could go get the bodies. The whole wedding party dead as leather. Over 30 folks gutted like pigs, and the place burned down in a huge flame. That was hard. He dropped his voice, and I lost what he was saying among the general noise of the room. I swallowed against the sudden dryness in my throat. I slowly pried off the last stitch on my cloak and set it down. I noticed my bleeding finger and absently put it in my mouth. I took a deep breath. A drink. Then I walked over to the table where the two men sat talking. "Do you gentlemen come down river by any chance?" He looked up, obviously irritated by the interruption. "Gentlemen, bent his finger," said Tony. The bald one nodded. "Did you come by way of Morrow?" I asked, picking a northern town at random. "No," the fat one said. "We're down from Traven." "Oh, good," I said, my mind racing for a plausible lie. "I have family up in those parts I was thinking of visiting." My mind went blank as I tried to think of a way to ask them for the details of the story I'd overheard. My palms were sweating. "Are they getting ready for the harvest festival up that way? Or have I already missed it?" I finished later. "Still in the works," the bald one said, and pointedly turned his shoulder to me. "I heard there was some problem with a wedding up in those parts." The bald one turned back to look at me. "Well, I don't know how you'd have heard that, as the news was fresh last night, and we just docked down here 10 minutes ago." He gave me a hard look. "I don't know what you're selling, boy, but I ain't buying. Pace off, or I'll thump you." I went back to my seat, knowing I'd made an irrecoverable mess of things. I sat, keeping my hands flat on the table to keep them from shaking. A group of people being killed. Through fire. Oddness. Chandrian. Less than a day ago, the Chandrian were in Traven. I finished my drink more out of reflex than anything else, then stood and made my way to the bar. I was quickly coming to grips with the reality of the situation. After all these years, I finally had the opportunity to learn something about the Chandrian, and not just a mention of them pressed flat between the pages of a book in the archives. I had the chance to see their work firsthand. This was an opportunity that might never come again. But I needed to get to Traven soon, while things were still fresh in people's memory, before curious or superstitious townfolk destroyed what evidence remained. I didn't know what I hoped to find, but anything I heard about the Chandrian would be more than I knew now. And if I were to have a chance at anything useful, I had to be there as soon as possible. Today. The morning crowd was keeping the innkeeper busy, so I had to lay an iron drab on the bar before she paid me any attention at all. After paying for a private room last night, and breakfast, and bath this morning, the drab represented a good portion of my worldly wealth, so I kept my finger on it. "What do you have?" she asked as she came up to me. "How far is it to Traven?" I asked. "A river? Couple of days." I didn't ask how long it was. I need to know how far, I said, stressing the last word. "Don't need to get snippy," she said, wiping her hands on her grubby apron. "By river, it's 40 miles or so. Could take more than 2 days, depending on if you're on a barge or a billow boat, and what the weather's like." "How far by road?" I asked. "Blacken me if I know," she muttered, then called down the bar. "Rud, how far to Traven by road?" 3 or 4 days, said a weathered man without looking up from his mug. I asked how far, she snapped at him. Is it longer than the riverway? Damn sight longer. About 25 leagues by road, a hard road too, uphill. What body? Who measured things in leagues these days? Depending on where that fellow grew up, a league could be anywhere between 2 to 3.5 miles. My father always claimed that a league wasn't really a unit of measurement at all, just a way for farmers to attach numbers to their rough guesses. Still, he let me know Traven was somewhere between 50 and 80 miles to the north. It was probably best to assume the worst, at least 70 miles. The woman behind the bar turned back to me. There you have it. Now, can I get you something? I need a water skin, if you have one, or a bottle of water if you don't, and some food that will keep on the road. Hard sausage, cheese, flatbread, apple? She asked. Got some lovely red jennies this morning. Good for the road. I nodded. And whatever else you have that's cheap and will travel. I'd rather go far, he said with a glance down at the bar. I shook out my purse and was surprised to see 4 drabs and a copper halfpenny I hadn't accounted for. I was practically rich. She gathered up my money and headed back to the kitchen. I fought off the momentary pang of being utterly destitute again and ran a quick mental inventory of what I had in my travel sack. She came back with 2 loaves of flatbread, a thick, hard sausage that smelled of garlic, a small cheese sealed in wax, a bottle of water, half a dozen gorgeous bright red apples, and a small sack of carrots and potatoes. I thanked her kindly and stuffed the lot into my sack. 70 miles. I could make it today if I had a good horse. But good horses cost money. I breathed in the smell of rancid fat as I knocked on Debbie's door. I stood there for a minute, fighting the urge to fidget impatiently. I had no idea if Debbie would be awake at such an early hour, but it was a risk I had to take. Debbie opened the door and smiled when she saw me. Well, here's a pleasant surprise. She opened the door wider. Come in, sit down. I gave her my best smile. Debbie, she frowned. Come in, she said more firmly. I don't discuss business on the landing. I came in and she closed the door behind me. Take a seat, unless you'd rather have a bit of a lie down. She nodded playfully toward the huge curtained bed in the corner of the room. You won't believe the story I heard this morning, she said, laughter hiding in her voice. Despite the urgency I felt, I forced myself to relax. Debbie was not one to be rushed. If I tried, it would only irritate her. What did you hear? She sat on her side of the desk and folded her hands. Apparently, last night, a pair of ruffians tried to lift the purse off a young student. Much to their dismay, it turns out he's the next Taberlin in training. He called down fire and lightning, blinded one and gave the other such a mighty blow to the head that he still hasn't woken up. I sat quietly for a moment as I absorbed the information. An hour ago, this would have been the best news I could have heard. Now it was hardly more than a distraction. Still, despite the urgency of my other errand, I couldn't ignore the chance to gather some information about the crisis closer to home. They weren't just trying to rob me, I said. Debbie laughed. I knew it was you. They didn't know anything about him except for that he had red hair, but that was enough for me. Did I really blind the one? I asked. And the other's still unconscious? I honestly don't know, Debbie admitted. News travels quickly among us unsavory types, but it's mostly gossip. My mind was spinning quickly along a new plan now. Would you care to spread a little gossip of your own? I asked. That depends.